everyone. Welcome back to Kingdom Conversations. We have Pastor Susie with us for a second episode.
Yeah, look at that.
We're just getting a lot of you on this, and it's great. So thanks for coming back.
Yeah.
And we are going to be talking about leadership, both in the workplace and also at church, right? As Christ followers, that's what we're called to do, is to be leaders.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's in the church, and a lot of times that's outside of the church, right? And this could be in terms of our job, our position, our work, what we do for work, but also just in general leading as just a Christ follower, right? And so I'd love to just start out and kind of hear your story, because many people might just know you as Pastor Susie working at a church, but you haven't always worked inside of a church.
I have not.
Yeah. So what has that kind of progression looked like for you?
Yeah. Well, I actually did, my first job was at church.
Yeah.
So I started as a teenager working at church. And then after graduating college, I was bivocational. So I worked in a church. I went to Bible school to be a pastor, but didn't have like a full-time opportunity. So I worked in the church part of the time, and then in other spaces the other time. I worked at Macy's for a while. Okay. And then just had to make a choice for our family, Kyle and I, early in our marriage, that he was going to prioritize school. And so I was going to go find a secular job and work full time. And so did that for, I think, about 7 years. I was trying to think about how long I was working outside of the church until I got an opportunity to work in the church again. Yeah. So I've kind of done a little bit of everything. But always felt a call to ministry and just knew that didn't always mean a job. So it's ministry has looked different in different seasons of life. Yeah,
I think having that mindset is the baseline starting place, right? To be able to do this successfully. Because if the call to ministry is just a title or a position, then even working in that title or position is going to be bad, right?
Yeah.
But then, in those seasons like you had, those 7 years working outside of the church, that would have been a miserable 7 years for you if you thought you were living outside of the call that God had on your life just because of the title or position that you had or didn't have, right? And so that call is so much more than just a job. It's a lifestyle, right? It's who we're called to be.
Absolutely.
And so that's like really the starting place for all of this that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
So let's kind of start with that period of your life when you're working outside of the church.
Yeah.
Leadership kind of in the secular world, right? What is it like to be a leader? I mean, we all know this to a certain degree, but from your experience, what was it like to lead in a secular work environment? What were some of the challenges that came with that?
I think some of the challenges are just the time balance of, okay, I have my job, my full-time job, and then on top of that, I want to be, a fully rounded person, maybe with friends or hobbies or those types of things. And then I want to do ministry in my church. I want to serve at my church. And so how do I do all of those things at the same time? And that doesn't even really change when you work at a church, but it's
different.
It is different, yeah. So I think that's the first thing I thought of, that's a unique challenge where you're working full time, but then you're also wanting to serve as much as you can.
Yeah, especially when that's like your heart, right?
Yes.
Is to serve the church. And obviously leadership happens wherever you're at, but that's like a unique serving opportunity, right? And so you want to take those opportunities. But time management is definitely the challenge. I think I've had different, experiences working here at Sound Life, and then, a couple different places outside of the church that I worked at. And I think for me, just the challenge is like the environment sometimes that you're in, right? Like you are sometimes the only person that wants to walk the way that you're walking, right? And sometimes everyone else is like in direct opposition to the way you're walking. And so it can feel kind of lonely sometimes, like I'm the only one trying to lead in this way, and the task of leading is strong because I know that I'm around people that are watching me and watching how I'm living my life. And so there's certainly, in every moment, right, there's leadership opportunities. So what are some of the lessons that you learned just like as a Christ follower leading out in the world?
Yeah, I was actually thinking of kind of along those same lines where when you're working with people, it's like every day. They see you every day. And so I think as a Christian, there's just this added I guess, an added opportunity, but an added pressure to live out your faith every day, in every moment. And in the workplace, like, they see you when you're late. Mm-hmm. They see you when you show up and you rolled out of bed and you're not your best self. Like,
they see it all.
They see it all. And so I think that was a unique opportunity because I did get to witness with using my words, you know, like talking about my faith, but then also without my words of just like, here's my life, and am I a fun, like, person to work with? Like, am I someone you want to be around? Because if you don't want to be around me, like, then you aren't going to want to come to church with me.
Totally.
So I think that was a unique lesson, and also a challenge at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a unique opportunity that I think, you know, there's aspects of it that become the challenge when you're working in a church environment, right? Because all our coworkers already believe in Jesus, right? And so you have that opportunity to, in your workplace where you spend a lot of your day, to be that kind of evangelical type person, you know, like doing evangelism. And so even just the other day, you know, that's the challenge when you're working in an environment where you're around, you know, believers a lot. You have to take the opportunities outside of your work hours to do those things that we're called to. And so even just last night, I had to take a CPR training class, and I turned it into Jesus. Yeah. So we're talking about Jesus, and it was actually really cool to have that moment and to be, you know, talking about Jesus and different scenarios where, you know, God has done miracles saving our lives, right? So we're doing CPR. And so it is those, like, I was thinking about that, like, how cool we get to have those opportunities, especially for somebody who's working with those people day in, day out. Yeah. It's more than just a conversation one-off, like, I'm probably never going to see those people again, but your coworkers are going to see you again tomorrow, and you're gonna be there when they have questions or when they need prayer, right? So that is a unique challenge and opportunity.
Absolutely.
For sure. So how has that kind of grown you in just your even understanding of ministry and your role in ministry, your calling in ministry? What are some of those lessons doing in your life?
Yeah, I think just overall, just our calling as Christians to serve other people. I think like that is actually how Jesus led, by serving. And so, you know, that's our calling even in the workplace. Like, are we serving people well, no matter where we work and what situation we find ourselves in? That's how you're going to be a good example. That's how people are going to say something's different about you. You're not just out for yourself. You're not just looking out for a raise or trying to get the best position or something. Like, you care about me, you know? And so caring for others just makes you stand out in a way that, like, no one else does, you know, for those reasons in a business. So yeah, I
think it's so relational, right? Like, you're just building relationships with those people, and that's how that ministry aspect comes into play. Like, you might even be flipping burgers at McDonald's, right? Or I've worked at Starbucks. Like, that was a ministry that I was able to engage in a relationship with people, whether they were a customer or a coworker. And so just having that relational mindset and taking that to, like, really getting to know those people and letting them get to know you. And when they get to know you, they should also be getting to know Jesus. Totally. Which is the challenge for sure. Yeah. So did you ever feel, you know, in that season when you were working outside of the church, did you ever feel like church, like working inside of a church was more important? I know there's kind of a common understanding or misunderstanding there that work within the church is more important or more ministry than work outside of the church. And how did you kind of work through that?
Yeah, I was reflecting on this, and I think this is one thing that I did not do very well, because I had this calling. I knew that I wanted to work in a church, like, ideally, right? Like, that would be my ideal. And so I think even more than viewing it as more important, I was, like, judging people who got to do that. And, you know, some of the things that they, like, some of the leaders I was judging, like, were valid reasons. But still the heart that I did it with was jealousy and, like, self-righteousness. And so God really had to do a work on my heart, and he did it by like knocking me down in the dust. Mm-hmm. I mean, allowing me to knock myself down, I guess. Right. And because of that failure in my own like kind of heart and attitude, that really transformed some things in my heart that needed to be transformed. To just kind of be a little, I don't know, to really talk with people more that I should have, to not judge people as much, and to work through issues. Like when I had an issue, to work through it the biblical way. Yeah. And once I did that, like that really changed my whole life, honestly. So I think that there is that tendency to think, oh, that's more important, or like, I wish I could do that, or like, why do they get to do that and I don't? And that's just not the right heart to ever have.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back down to comparison, right? Mm-hmm. You're comparing your journey with somebody else's journey, and the ways that God is answering somebody else's prayers versus your prayers. And really, that is a hard thing to walk through, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's okay that it's hard. Yeah. Because you did feel called to vocational ministry in the church. Yeah. And so you were doing it in a different way than you imagined it to look in that season. And there's seasons for everything, right? Yeah. And so I think that is hard to hold that loosely in the way of what it looks like. Yeah. And allow God to, I know that God called you to ministry in that season just as much as he has in this season. Yeah. And so understanding that and understanding where a calling comes from. And it might be, you know, for those joining us, like, you might not be called into vocational ministry, but you are still called into ministry, right? Like, as Christ followers, we are all called to ministry. And so it just is a matter of what that looks like and how God has uniquely created each one of us, right? To live that out and what that might look like. And it could look like a whole lot of things, right? And there's going to be different seasons where he used you in that secular work environment, and now he's using you in a church environment. And who you are, how he made you, is all in play, right? If we allow it to be. Yeah. And so I think it goes really back to that understanding of what our calling is, and not allowing it to be a certain place or a certain position or title or any of those things that we so often attach to calling. Yeah. That it's not. And like I said, you know, I've even struggled with that, right? Working in a church, that it was, okay, what am I really called to? Like, you know, everyone, I feel like there's a lot of people that are like, oh yeah, I'm called to be a youth pastor, kids pastor. In college and out of college, like, I never felt that type of calling, right? And so even in the church, I've had to work through, okay, what does my calling mean? And what does that say about me? And how do I live this out, right? And it's not a position or a title or any of those things. So we're all going to have to figure out what that looks like for us. And that might even be for, you know, what it looks like to live your calling out in the secular world. Like, how is God going to use your unique shape to live that out in the practical ways of life? So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's good.
All right, so then kind of you shared that you were working outside of the church, and then God opened up doors for you to work inside the church. Yeah. So how has that been challenged? How has that challenged your leadership in the context of doing ministry now in the church?
Yeah. I think it's funny because it's almost the exact flip side of how I was feeling challenged outside the church, where I was just sharing about, like, almost judging people, because now I feel the weight of that. Yeah. And I think working in a church is just so unique because you're dealing with people, and you're dealing with lots of confidential things and things that happen behind the scenes that you're just ministering with broken people. And so sometimes there's like judgment on church leadership and like, why are they doing that? Why did they make that decision? And you're like, I can't actually tell you all the reasons why. Yeah. And so there's this level of like, man, I wish you knew everything, because then you would fully understand. And it's just so funny thinking back to who I was and how I was literally doing that. And so now I think that's maybe one of the most felt things is that, there's this level of confidentiality that we hold as pastors, and we need to. That's really important. Yeah. But at the same time, it makes some things hard to explain.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, and there's always going to be that tension of feeling misunderstood, right? And that's part of leadership, is you're signing up to be misunderstood in a lot of ways. And so coming to terms with that, but then also like yeah, it is this kind of healthy weight to handle, that it's like, okay, I need to, like, we're stewarding people's lives, right? Like, it's not just a flippant thing. Like, we cannot be flippant about it, and we need to take it seriously because that's what God has called us to steward. Yeah. And that's a big deal. And so, yeah, that's definitely a challenge and a honor, right? That we get to do those things. Yeah. And I think it's just really a push to live above reproach, right? That we're going to be honest where we can be honest and not share things that shouldn't be shared and just hold that appropriately, right? Because even, there's things that are, different about work in a church that are not normal about other work. And so sometimes that is confusing to people who have never worked in a church. Yeah. And so it's like living above reproach in the way of like, there is certain stigmas or things that like have been maybe known of people working in a church that like we're not about that, right? Yeah. Like we don't want people to think that we're just like hanging out, not doing anything lazy all week. Yeah, totally. Yeah, because it is serious stuff that we need to take seriously the way that God takes seriously. So that's definitely a healthy weight there for sure. So what has church ministry taught you about leadership outside of the church? Yeah.
I think going along those same lines is just the importance of accountability. Like every leader, I mean, every person needs accountability in their life, but especially leaders, like anyone you follow, you should know that they have accountability to them. And we let this a little bit loose in the church, and the world judges us for it. And rightly so, anything that's like a scandal of abuse in churches, you look at it and you're like, yeah, there was no accountability there. In the business world, the same thing. Like you just look at people, and without one another holding each other accountable, like God didn't create us for life that way. Right. So anyway, I think it's just taught me the importance of that, the importance of having honest people you can be fully honest with, and that know what you're struggling with, that know how you're walking with God. And then, as pastors, we have accountability in our church with leaders in our church, and then also with our board, but then also with our denomination. And those things, I just think I'm just like the biggest champion of that, because I've seen where that doesn't, if there's no accountability, if there's no structure like that, it just is not healthy. And
it's dangerous.
It's very dangerous in every kind of leadership arena there is.
Totally. Yeah, I think it just kind of goes back to stewardship again too, right? Like, how are we stewarding what God has given us? And so obviously there's that weight that we were just talking about with stewardship, but I think there's an understanding, we see it and like hear of it often because of what we do in the church, but there's no reason that it shouldn't be the same outside of the church, right? Like whatever you have in front of you, whatever God, whatever influence, whoever, you're around, all of those things, the things that you're working on, you have responsibility to steward them well, not just because of who your employer is, right? Like, it's more than an employer, it's more than other coworkers, it's God. Like, God has appointed you, if you're in line with what he wants you to do with your life, then he's the one that has appointed you. Like, work unto the Lord for all things that you're doing, right? Otherwise, you're going to burn out or, crash out. I don't know what. It's not going to end well, right? If you're doing it for other reasons.
That's good.
With, like, an unhealthy flippancy to what it is. Like, that's the danger in thinking that church ministry is more important. Like, the way that you show up to work sets the standard, right? Like, if you're showing up more prepared to volunteer on Sunday, then you give care to your job during the week. You're not working for the Lord all the other 5 days of the week, right? And so just understanding that whatever you do, it's done because of Christ, right? And what he's done for us. And so having that, and then just understanding that we can't do it without him. Like, that's the biggest thing I think that I've learned as I've worked in professional environments, is especially the more that I do church ministry, I'm like, I can't, like, this is way bigger than me. Like, I am not cut out for this, right? And I'm just reminded how much I need to depend on God to do any of it, right? To take care of my family and to do anything that I do in life. Like, that's a dangerous place we go to when we think that we can control it on our own and handle it on our own. So I think that's a big lesson that I've learned personally. So in ministry and all the different seasons that kind of you've walked through, ministry has looked a lot of different ways, even within the church, like a lot of different roles on staff here.
Yeah.
So what has the journey and all the different transitions within ministry taught you about leadership?
Yeah. I think that one of the things, I said in the beginning that it wasn't always like a job to me, that it was like this calling beyond that. And I think I have tried to lean into that in every season. And so no matter if my job was like an administrator or, stay-at-home mom, I was finding opportunities to minister, to serve in the church. And so I think that, like, if that's your heart to do ministry, or with your calling, like, it shouldn't just be based on a pay or a title. Like, it should naturally just flow out of you, and you should be that passionate about it. So I think that's what has, I don't know, really stuck with me of, okay, I am passionate about this. I'm willing to do this outside of my work hours, and then I'm willing to do it inside of work hours, like kind of both ways. So I think just that, like, your heart for ministry, it's the same in any season, even if kind of what your ministry is looks different.
Yeah, like how you're living it out might change.
Yeah.
But the passion and heart behind it should always remain fixed on God. Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, and I think just realizing too that, like, God's gonna set you up, right? Like, I've seen such an obvious thread throughout my life since, really since birth, obviously, but in different jobs and different opportunities that he's given me. Sometimes I'm like, okay, why did that happen? Or why did he have me doing that? And in the moment, it doesn't really make sense sometimes. But then down the road, I'm like, oh my goodness, like, God did that on purpose because I needed to learn that. I needed to experience that to now, be able to do what I'm doing today. And so he's going to set you up, and we just have to be obedient and trust him, with every step along the process.
Yeah.
So how did you know, like, in those transitions, obviously we don't want to just walk into things blindly, things that, because there's going to be opportunities that maybe aren't the right opportunities for you to take. So how did you know where and what was right in each moment?
I think it just means, like, walking with the Lord so that you know his voice when any opportunity knocks. There's definitely been opportunities I've been presented with where it wasn't the right one. And sometimes, like, the right one, it feels like, okay, I really got to pray about this and think about it. I was offered this job as a youth pastor, and it was kind of, like, amazing. They had their own youth building and, like, all this stuff. Yeah. I was just graduated college. And then it was, like, there was in my spirit, I just knew it wasn't right.
Yeah.
And I almost, like, delayed the decision, just trying to convince myself that it was. So I think that sometimes there's just this, like, Holy Spirit gut reaction, like, thinking secular culture, they call it your gut, but I think it's the Holy Spirit in you. Yeah. And so I think that when you're walking with the Lord, you know his voice, and you know when there's, like, a peace and a confidence about something, and sometimes just, like, even admitting to yourself that you have that peace and confidence is the hardest part.
Yeah.
And if you're averse to change, that can be really hard too. Like, it can be more about that than about God leading you. And one thing that I've loved about, like, Pastor Caleb is just encouraged, us as a staff, just, like, do things, step out in faith, like, don't be afraid of failure. Just, like, go all in with Jesus and make a mistake for Jesus. If you make it for him, it doesn't matter.
Totally. Yeah, I'd rather make a mistake for him than choose to, out of a lack of faith, not do anything.
Right.
Totally, yeah. And just, like, allowing people around you to speak into that, right? Like, there's been moments where I'm, like, wrestling with, I don't feel like there's maybe a clear, like, God's not saying yes or no. Yeah. And so I'm just, obviously, in prayer, allowing him to speak into that. But then also wrestling with that in community, right? Like, my parents and mentors in my life and pastors in my life that can speak into that, and maybe even can see the things that I don't see, right? Like, oh, I think you're maybe leaning into some fear in this. Like, you're just, like you said, change averse. I don't want to change. And so there's moments like that where they can lovingly say, I think that might be a factor in this. Right. And so you need to pray about, okay, Lord, is this a fear response? Or am I called to step out in faith?
Yeah.
And then just knowing sometimes you're going to have to step out in faith. And it's not like God's going to audibly say, yes, you should take this job.
Yeah.
Or yes, you should make this change in your life. Sometimes he speaks clearly, and sometimes there are those steps of faith. And some of the best advice that I've ever been given is basically that God needs you to just move so he can steer you, right? Like, he can't steer a parked car.
Right,
You have to just, obviously not just like bolt towards what you want and go crazy. Allow him to be in control, but in faith, keep moving forward and allowing him to direct your life.
Yeah, that's really good.
In a way that he wants it to go. So if we kind of move into living this out practically, what does this look like for us, for anybody listening? To live this out, how do we kind of balance that idea we've already talked about, the position versus character, like being who you've been called to be, versus just living in a position or a job title? How do you balance that?
Yeah, I think of David, who we've started talking about this summer at Sound Life, and like he was anointed as king.
Yeah.
Years and years before he ever got the position and got the title, and so I do think there is like this season that God does develop your character. And I think there's nothing but patience you can have when you're like in character, which we're always in character development.
Yeah.
But I think we should never strive for position. Like we should always strive for like that anointing, because it's God who will bring it in the right time. He'll set you up like you were talking about. And so we should always strive for character. But I think there is something to that, like, have ambition, like don't be afraid about it, like step out in faith sometimes regarding that, but like don't be, if you fail, like that's okay too. Like if you don't get the job or it turns out to be a no for you, like let God develop your character in that also.
Totally. It comes down to the heart posture. I think, if you're just striving to have a job title or power or position or any of those things, that's the wrong reason to do it, right?
Yeah.
And that's where that character development needs to progress before God wants you to step into that. Otherwise, it's unnecessary failure, right? Like, I only want to fail when necessary.
Yeah,
I don't want to do it just to do it. So I think that's a big thing, is just always checking, okay, why am I doing this? What are my motives? That's what is my heart? What is when I'm being really honest with myself and allowing the Holy Spirit to check my heart, why am I really doing this or desiring this in my life? So
yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So what does being in ministry really mean, right? Like we say, I'm in ministry. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, as pastors, we're called to equip the saints for ministry. So we are all in ministry. We're all called to go and make disciples. So, I mean, doing that as a job means that we get to strategize and plan and do kind of the work behind the scenes to equip people for ministry. And we're an organization, like we're also, there's phones to answer and mail and bills to pay and some of those things that you don't think about the church having to run. We have to fix broken things and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot that is ministry that's not just, meeting with people for over coffee.
Right.
But that is some of it. And I think also, we take time as a staff in prayer and we meet together often, ask God for vision and learning and those types of things as well. So being in ministry, for us, we get the pleasure to do that as a job, but all believers are called to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really just comes down to working for the Lord on mission with him, right? And that how you do that changes, but the overall general application of ministry is being on mission with God and doing his work for his people and the people that we want to be his people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how can we all get involved, like a next step kind of thing? Like get involved in ministry right here, right now. Not even like change your job.
Yeah.
But like just with the circumstance of our life, however that looks. How do we get involved in ministry?
Absolutely. I think, there's kind of the cliche answer I could give you. Join a team at Sound Life Church and we need you, which is very true. We do. But I think just in that sense of, Jesus' command to go and make disciples, like just meeting somebody and having a conversation like this and saying, how is God working in your life? if you meet with somebody who is a little newer on the journey than you, that's called mentorship.
Yeah.
And you just give them some next steps. You pray over them, help them be accountable to those things.
Yeah.
I think mentorship is a really easy one. It's a huge need that we have in the church.
Absolutely.
Not just our church, but every church. And so I think that beyond like a programmed, way to get involved at Sound Life, mentor somebody, open your home and have people over for dinner, just like be involved in people's lives, like praying for one another, meeting together. Those are very biblical ways of sharing your home, sharing everything you have. Like that is ministry.
Yeah. Ministry, relationships, right? Like just be in relationship with people and invite people to come with you to church and tell them about Jesus and all those things. Like it's so relational in a lot of ways and very practical in a lot of other ways. So I think really just having the eyes to see the needs, like see the people that you can reach out to, right? Because it's so easy to just get sucked into the like rhythms of our day and the rhythms of our week. And when we're not even in vocational ministry in a church, right? Like we get, heads down, we're working. And it's like, oh, but I just missed 5 things that God really wanted me to do or 5 people that he really wanted me to connect with. So I think just even praying this week that God would give us the eyes to see the ministry that he wants us to put our hands to and allowing him to work through us.
That's really good too. And I think of maybe people that are less relational and maybe that sounds really intimidating to do. But I think to what you said, the find a need and fill it, like that also exists where, we have people that come and minister by mowing the lawn at Sound Life, like by giving their talents and building things. So I think there's also other things, let God stretch you in that relationship way. But if you're also gifted in other ways too, that's your ministry. And so use that for God's glory.
Absolutely. Yeah. But we're not just going to talk about the kingdom, right? We're going to go out and be the kingdom. And we're here to support you in whatever that looks like. So have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week.
Welcome, Sound Life Church. I'm Pastor Sean, and I'm here with the parenting tip of the week. And so this week, I'd love to look at honesty, just like a 30,000-foot view of honesty. Honesty is modeled to our children. Because here's the thing, how many of you would recognize that kids fib? Some even kids will bold-face lie. Sometimes we're very disappointed in our children because they just won't come forward and tell the truth. And I would challenge you as a parent to remember that honesty is modeled. We model honesty to our kids. How we interact with others, the things that we say and do we cut corners? And then heaven forbid, would they even accuse us of cheating, right? That would be a form of dishonesty with kids. And so I would like to challenge you to be honest with your kids. And if you've done something wrong or you've made a mistake, to give them that honest answer is important. Now, we have to be age appropriate, so we need to be age appropriate on what we admit that we've done to our kids. And so there's discretion that is involved there. But remember, every decision that you make during the day is modeling how you want your kids to behave. Because what you do in moderation, they will do in excess. And so I just encourage you with that, and then be willing to say you're sorry. That's another way that we can model honesty. We can say, hey, I messed up, but I'm sorry. And then Proverbs 12 is like a series of one-liners about truth, and I'd like to read it to you. Proverbs 12, verse 17. An honest witness tells the truth. A false witness tells lies. Some people make cutting remarks, but the words of the wise bring healing. Verse 19, truthful words stand the test of time, but lies are soon exposed. Deceit fills hearts that are plotting evil. Joy fills hearts that are planning peace. Verse 21, no harm comes to the godly, but the wicked have their fill of trouble. Verse 22, the Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in those who tell the truth. And then verse 23, the wise don't make a show of their knowledge, but fools broadcast their foolishness. And I just think it's funny there. In rapid succession, God gives us a model of what truth and the importance of truth. And so I would just encourage you, be honest with your kids and they'll be honest with you.